So before I get started with this talk, this is a talk I've been working on. I've been capitulating on it and thinking about it. I have a moleskin notebook that I write all my ideas down in. It's something I've been working on for the last year. I've actually never given this talk. This is the first time I'm giving it. Also, to go along with this talk, I always publish a blog post. And so I released a blog post that's basically everything that we're going to talk about today. And so this talk really came from a couple of things. So I read a great book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. And anybody who's interested in leadership, I highly recommend the book. There are other books that I've read as well, but I really incorporated a lot of her ideas into it. And then I really sat down and self-reflected on things that I'm doing day to day, running a blog, helping start a residency program, maybe mentorship, leadership that I've gotten as I've been going through. And I started thinking about some of the good and bad things, good and bad examples. And I kind of put all those together into this one talk. The second thing I kind of incorporated into this talk is it's not fun to just kind of give people a review of topics, and that gets kind of boring. And so I started thinking about chess. I played chess every day with my grandfather when I was a kid. I remember being 6, 7 years old and him trying to teach me how to play chess. And the thing about chess was, when I was a kid, I thought the most important piece on the board was the king. The reality is that the king is probably the least important piece. Can't move that very far for those of you that play chess, can't really do much. It's really optimally maximizing everybody else's moves, strategies, and the things that you can do to win the game. And so it's very much like working in an ER. It's not the people that sit in the ivory towers behind desks that make all the decisions, right? It's those of us that are down in the front lines that are working and taking care of patients and have to deal with the systems that we work in. And so I found a lot of analogies with chess and leadership that I wanted to go over with you over the next 30 minutes. So I'm a big mind mapper. If you don't know what mind mapping is, it's kind of figuring out what your core message is and then what are the teaching points you want to give to people. I love to put that up for you as a kind of strategy of what we're going to go through. And so we're going to talk about how not to be a boss, right? Titles don't make leaders. And then we're going to talk about all the different pieces on the board and the analogies that I can think of in my own self-reflection and the books that I've read. So first, don't be a boss. I like this quote. People ask the difference between a leader and a boss. The leader leads and the boss drives. So to me, this is like hierarchy versus no hierarchy in a business or at a job. And so what I mean is, in one scenario, you have somebody that sits at the top of the pyramid and barks a bunch of orders or directs people to do things, and that kind of disseminates through the ranks. But I think most of us nowadays know that probably a better idea is to have more of a flat hierarchy where you're getting input from multiple people, different aspects, and that you take all that into mind as you make decisions. I think it's also important as the person who makes decisions that you're also working down in the front line. So it doesn't matter if you're the CEO of a company or you're the janitor, you're getting somebody's input so that the decisions you make don't negatively impact the people you work with. So I want to talk about some mistakes that I've made trying to be a leader, and I sincerely meant these as a good thing. I was trying to do the right thing, and I was actually hurting those around me. So I wanted to talk about those a little bit. So the first is being a rescuer. So this sounds kind of doesn't make sense, like it's a good thing if you help rescue somebody. Well, what I'm not talking about is, I'm not talking about letting somebody fall flat on their face or get self-harm or injury. But there's something really important about letting people make mistakes and getting some feedback from those mistakes. Because that feedback just helps you grow. It helps push you further. You know, Thomas Edison said, I didn't fail making the light bulb 10,000 times. I just learned 10,000 ways not to make it. And each time was a little bit of feedback for him till he finally figured out how to make the light bulb. Well, it's the same thing for all of us. So if all you do is swoop in and every time there's trouble, you just take over and you just don't let people make mistakes, you're actually diminishing those around you and not allowing them to grow from that feedback. The second thing is, I wanted to be an empire builder. When I started, just look at the name, Rebel EM, right? I was like, a rock star. I had like the man bun going, the big beard. Like I just wanted to like be different than traditional education in medicine. I just wanted to like dominate. The problem with that is that as you start to acquire more talent, as you start to get more people on your team, the problem with being an empire builder is the focus is always on you as the empire builder and not everybody else on the team. What's more important is instead of building an empire is growing those around you and let them speak for themselves. That in itself will make a bigger ripple and a bigger empire than anything you'll try and do that's self-fulfilling for yourself. So that's the second mistake I made when I first started doing all this. And then the final thing is being a rapid responder. Problem comes up, I'm the first one to answer. Well, the problem with that is then people start expecting you to be the first one that answers, and the people get disengaged. They don't care anymore because they know you're going to come up with a solution. It's better to let others come up with the solution first, and you kind of just sit back and listen. Right? These are just some mistakes that I've made. There's many, many more. I could just give a lecture on just the mistakes I've made. So the queen. So I think of queen as motherly, kind of nurturing, right? So we're going to develop talent. So how do we develop talent around us? So this is the guy who created Walmart. Outstanding leaders go out of their way to boost the self-esteem of their personnel. People believe in themselves. It's amazing what they can accomplish. So boosting the self-esteem of those around you is such an important thing. So everybody in this room has something called native genius. So let me explain what native genius is. Native genius is that thing that you just do absolutely amazingly well with little effort, and you completely enjoy doing it. So you never had any training in it. There's always something that we all have, little quirks, little things that we pick up on that we're actually really good at. The problem is that's usually subconscious. We don't even realize we're good at it. As a leader, pointing that out to somebody and telling them, putting a label on whatever it is that they're really good at, now makes it a conscious thing. And now that it's a conscious thing, they actually are more aware of it, they push their boundaries more, and they work harder to make that native genius even better. So identifying that for people, just putting a label on it goes a long way. The second thing is that I used to be scared to let go of projects and give them to other people. But I think there's something important about pushing people's boundaries, giving them a project that's maybe a couple sizes too big for them. Maybe they're not ready to do it. And the point I'm getting at is this. We all kind of have this comfort zone, and as we're matriculating through medicine, our comfort zone is kind of small, right? We're just like, it's nerve-wracking, like you're working around all these really smart people and all these specialists, you don't want to screw up. But having somebody that kind of pushes you out of your comfort zone and makes you feel a little uncomfortable, pushes your boundaries, gives you a book chapter to write, asks you to work on a presentation for a conference or a write-up for a journal, but is there to kind of guide you and mentor you as you go through those steps. There's a lot to be said for that. And probably one of my biggest fears was getting up in front of people and speaking. Like sweaty palms, hated it, hated it. I couldn't see anybody's face, I'd always get nervous, I couldn't think on the spot, but somebody kept pushing me to like do it, and I had guidance along the way, and now it's actually become a thing that I actually enjoy doing. I love standing up here and talking about different ideas and concepts. But it was only because somebody helped push me and push me outside of what I thought was comfortable for me. And then the final thing is, and this goes back to the empire builder, is you don't ever want to be the superstar on the team. Like, yeah, it sounds good on the surface. You actually want to be the person that helps grow superstars on the team. So Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson, there's always this big debate. I may be dating myself a little bit about who was the best player in the NBA. We can all talk about LeBron James since we're up in Ohio, but we'll just stick with these two for right now. And the thing is that Jordan was an amazing basketball player, but his team was only as good as him because everything went through him. Magic Johnson was just as good a player, but I felt like he got undershadowed because he always distributed and made everybody around him better. And that's the type of leader I want to be. I don't want to be the Michael Jordan where everything comes funneling through me. I want to be the person that's distributing out and making everybody around me better. It has much more impact. The one fear with that is that as you start developing talent, people will move on. And so I like to use academic life in emergency medicine and Michelle Lin as an example, because I actually used to write for Michelle Lin on academic life and emergency medicine when I first started. When she recruited me, she recognized some talent, she labeled it, and then she helped give me projects that were probably too big for my shoes at the time. And over time, she helped develop me into what we call an A-plus player. By becoming an A-plus player, I now started having my own voice. I started speaking publicly. I started writing up, doing research, increased my market value. And then ultimately what ended up happening is I veered off and started my own blog, which she absolutely supported. So people think like, well, I'll run out of talent. I'm expending all this energy and people will move on to other projects. But what actually ends up happening is you start building a reputation as a place for people to go that are up and comers to grow and become your own A-plus player. And she's never short on talent, and she's never short on people wanting to work on her site, because she's now got a reputation as a place that helps people grow to find out what they're passionate about and push them toward that. So the bishop. So this made me think of, you commit a sin, you go to church, you confess your sin. In medicine, there seems to be this thing where we just absolutely can't make mistakes. 0 mistakes, no tolerance policy. I hate to tell all of you this, but we're all human. Mistakes are gonna happen. And there's probably a good way to handle mistakes. And it's not chewing somebody out or making them get up in front of their entire class and doing an M&M. The most important part here that we'll get to is that not that we just have to have open minds about exploring mistakes, but we also have to have reflection about those mistakes and why that mistake happened and what we can do to ensure that it doesn't happen again. So I'm not saying we need to ease off to the point that we're not thinking about these things, but I think the way we handle things in medicine is a bit harsh. We are really harsh to each other about this. Everybody's very quick and emotional to put somebody down when a mistake is made. And I know every single one of you in here has made a mistake, because I know I have. And the key in this quote is, I think it's very important to have a feedback loop, and that's the key, is the feedback loop, right? Where you're constantly thinking about what you've done and how you could be doing it better. And this is what I think is more important in medicine. So the first thing as a leader is, instead of getting viscerally emotional with somebody, it's better to just sit down and listen to them. Ask them questions. What were the circumstances of why something happened? What were you thinking? Try and get into their minds and think about what it is that was the cause of that mistake. So you want to listen more than you talk at the beginning. The next thing you want to do is you want people to feel safe. You want to level that playing field. So I don't care if you're the janitor or you're the CEO of the company, you should have the same voice if there was a problem that happened. I always say emergency medicine is a team sport, that none of us could do our job without somebody else in that department. And that includes nurses, that includes techs, that includes therapists, and that includes the janitors. We call them environmental services at my shop. But if it wasn't for them and the trash cans were overflowing with trash, like, how am I supposed to do my job, right? If there's not somebody turning over the beds after we dispo a patient, how am I supposed to do my job? So same thing about mistakes. People should feel comfortable coming and talking to somebody without thinking they're gonna lose their job or that they're gonna get in trouble. So that's the second thing. And then the final thing is you want to learn from these mistakes. And I think talking about how we can learn from it and systems we can put into place to help improve and ensure that that mistake doesn't happen again is really important. Challenging direction. So the castle. This is where committees get together, they sit down, and they make decisions, right? And they're ultimately the ones that it funnels through about, like, for the sepsis core measures, that we're gonna give the 30 cc's per kilo of fluid, and we're gonna make sure we get antibiotics within 3 hours, and all these sorts of things. Well, these all happen kind of in the castle during these committee meetings. But I think it's important to have people on these committees that challenge direction a little bit. And so I'm not talking about going rogue. And so this is a long quote, and I'll let you read it on your own. This is the most important thing I can tell you about being a leader, is that you never want to be on either extreme. You kind of want everything in moderation, but you want to be strong in what you're doing. You want to be thoughtful in what you're doing, right? You want to have a sense of humor, not have an ego. And we've all dealt with those people that, like, you just don't want to talk to them anymore because they're kind of jerks, right? It's a simple rule to live by. Don't be a jerk. But I think it's also important to stand for what you believe in, but doing it in a nice, thoughtful way. So one thing I love to do on committees is I love to ask questions that they look at me like I'm crazy, like I've got 4 heads. So at our last sepsis committee meeting, they were wanting to increase the door to antibiotic, or decrease the door to antibiotic time to 1 hour. Has this started coming up in y'all's shops at all? And this is all based off of retrospective observational septic shock literature. It's not based off of severe sepsis and sepsis literature. And so you start asking questions and they look at you, but instead of you answering the question, you let them figure it out. But you gotta have somebody who has a voice that stands strong, but you can do it in a diplomatic way. The second thing I'm gonna tell you is that when you ask these impossible questions, it's important to set yourself up and your team up for a win early. What I find is people wanna go from 0 to 100 in 30 seconds, and that's not always possible. But if you go 1% of improvement every day for the next 100 days, what percentage of improvement is that over 100 days? It adds up. And that's what you want to do, is when you ask these big questions, you want to make sure you partition them so that there are small early wins, little baby steps up to the point that you actually answer the ultimate question that you were asking to begin with. And this is something that I've really started incorporating in the last 6 months. And that is this concept of cognitive reframing. The connotation people put with different ideas is so important for how much you will get out of them and how much effort they will put into it themselves. And so what I'm getting at is you have a problem or you have an opportunity. If I put those 2 words in front of you, which one would you want to work on, the problem or the opportunity? It's the same difference. It's just you're reframing the way people think about things. So you want to reframe things to be not a problem, but an opportunity. So one example was we were starting to notice our door-to-balloon times starting to go up in our ER. And so there was an opportunity to decrease that door-to-balloon time, right? It was a problem, but you reframe it as an opportunity to fix this. You could be the one that's responsible for fixing this. So it's all about reframing. Debating decisions. This is so important. And it's something we don't do enough. People like to hear themselves talk. But the most powerful person in the room isn't the person that talks, it's the person that listens and gets information out of everybody. Because knowledge is power. Knowledge is king or queen, depending on, I'm not chauvinistic, so. But debating decisions is so important, and this is something we do on Rebel EM. Every blog post, every podcast that comes out, you guys don't know this, but the inner workings of the site are there are 4 or 5 doctors, some in the community, some at standalone, some in an academic institution, and we're all peer reviewing the post. And then the author goes back and makes their edits, and then that's ultimately what gets posted on the site. So what you read is probably the 5th or 6th version of whatever it was we initially started working with. Good quote by Henry Ford, coming together is the beginning, keeping together is progress, but working together is success. Working together. So how do you work together? Well, you make sure that everybody has a voice. You get opinions and thoughts from everybody. If there's something you're going to implement, like changing your EMR, or maybe the way you do a lab test, maybe getting input from the lab techs to see what that means for them is probably an important thing. Asking the docs how that's going to affect the decisions that they make. The nurses, how much blood, what kind of tubes. You probably want to make sure everybody's involved in the decision that's about to be made without just roguely making the decision. And oftentimes in medicine, we all see this. There's a decision that comes from the top and it comes all the way down, and it actually makes your job harder because nobody thought to sit down and get your opinion on it. If you ever have somebody who's really strongly pro something or strongly con something, here's an interesting concept. Ask them to come up with reasons why they should have the opposite argument. So cricoid pressure is a great example because we have a blog post that's coming out on that soon. Foreshadowing. And there was a guy who was like really strongly against cricoid pressure. And I'm not saying we should be doing cricoid pressure, but we asked him to come up with reasons why you might want to do cricoid pressure. And it was interesting to see, instead of being so strongly negative against cricoid, he actually kind of became a little more reserved about what he thought. Still negative cricoid, but just not viscerally, emotionally pissed off about it. So hopefully you guys will pick up on that on the post. The last thing is you want to make sure that whatever arguments, whatever things you're going to debate about, you do it in a fact, evidence-based way. And you want to set that tone up front. I see this on social media all the time. People will start cursing at you and they'll start saying things that are inappropriate. Nothing you would say to somebody in their face. But on social media it's okay because it's not a person, right? So you're starting to see this become more and more pervasive, and just telling people like, okay, let's just talk about the facts, right? Let's leave emotions out of it. Let's just talk about the facts. And then the last piece of this talk is supporting the environment. And this is probably one of the most important things that needs to happen that doesn't always happen. The number one reason people get burned out is because whatever it is that they're doing, they feel like there's somebody that's not listening to them, and they're just doing the same thing over and over and over. We all work hard. There's no such thing as nobody works hard. If you're doing emergency medicine, you work hard, and you all know it. And you have to deal with really crappy situations. So there's no question. But why is it that some people burn out more than others? It's because of the environment that you're in, and whether that's a toxic environment or it's a supportive environment. This is the most important thing that doesn't happen the most often. Leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure the impact lasts in your absence. Everything on Rebel EM used to funnel through me. Every single post, every single infographic, everything through me. And eventually what ended up happening is the team got bigger and bigger. I started becoming a bottleneck. I was slowing it down. So you want to help grow those around you so that you don't have to be around all the time. It's kind of cool to see my people like going off and speaking at conferences and publishing in journals and seeing where they're going. It's kind of fun to be the person that's responsible for that. So give people ownership. Give them a project. Let them run with it. You can still be there in the background, but just let them go. Help increase that confidence. Invest time and resources in those people. Don't just give them the project and walk away. Let them know that there's a safety net there, that you're willing to help, right? And as I said at the beginning, you're willing to help, but have an exit strategy. Don't just take the project over from them, because there's nothing that's more diminishing than starting a project and then having somebody take over the work you've been doing. Because I'll tell you that if somebody's been working on something for 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, there's nothing I'm going to tell them in the 3 minutes that I was listening to them that I'm going to know more than them that's working on that project. So have an exit plan, give them some advice, and let them figure out the nuances. So there it is. That's the mind map. That's what chess and leadership have in common, at least in my opinion. And then I'd like to leave you guys with one final quote to close out the talk. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. And I think at the end of the day, that's all any of us want. We want to be inspired, and we want to inspire those around us. And I'm not trying to be a martyr in saying that, but I think the reason you wake up and put your shoes on and come to work with a smile on your face is because you're inspired to do it, or you're just kind of down in the dumps because you're not inspired. So at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. And if each of us does our own little piece, I don't care if you're a med student, if you're a resident, if you're a staff, if you're the chair, if you're the program director, if everybody does their piece and pays it forward, we can change the way medicine is. We can change the way we are in the emergency department. And it all starts with leadership. Titles don't make leaders. Thank you very much for having me.